keep tonight's talk really light and informal. First of all, I have to say it's so inspiring to me to see so many people here interested in this topic. I'm always inspired by people who we work with that want to come in and make an investment and a commitment to their health. I think that's one of the most amazing and inspiring things anyone can do. So thank you for being here. And tonight's talk, which I know a lot of you already know from us putting the word out, we're going to be talking about fat in our diet and why we should not fear it, because I'm sure many of you are probably familiar with the concept that fat makes you fat and fat gives you heart disease and fat kills us. And we're finding out that that might not be the case exactly. So just to give you a brief overview of where we're going to get started, first of all, I think it's important to understand why we're here and how we got here. I do have to touch on the science and trends because, again, I think it's important to know the why. When you know and understand the why of this, I think it makes it a little easier to understand and then actually implement it into your life. So the other thing we'll talk about are macronutrients. So macronutrients, and I'll go into a lot more depth: fats, protein, carbohydrates. I think it's important to understand what that means and what they are, and how they affect our metabolism, because that plays a huge role there. So, and then hopefully I'll be able to answer a lot of questions through common misconceptions with fat in our diet. But again, because I want to keep this really light and informal, if you have a question during the presentation, just raise your hand and ask. I think that's a really good way to learn. So, and then we'll try to save some time at the end for some additional question and answer session there. So let's start at the beginning. How did we get here? So back in the late 1950s, a scientist by the name of Ancel Keys did a 7-country study. And it was called the 7-country study because he ended up publishing data on 7 different countries. And he was trying to examine an association between cardiovascular disease and the percentage of fat in the overall diet. So as you can see from this graph, he got some pretty interesting data that would make us think that the amount of fat that we eat in our diet does have a strong correlation with deaths related to cardiovascular disease. So, obviously, again, what this study was revealing here was that in countries where they're consuming the most fat, there was a higher association with heart disease. Unfortunately, there was one little problem with his study. He didn't just have information from 7 countries, he actually had information from 22 different countries. And in some of those countries, which you can see here, it doesn't quite make a nice line like the previous graph did. And in the scientific community, that's kind of hard to really drive your point home when you have a graph that looks like this. So understandably for him, being the scientist and wanting to publish his work, he intentionally left out countries where we actually had higher amounts of fat in the diet, but lower amounts of cardiovascular disease or heart disease. And then there were a few countries that had lower amounts of fat in the diet, but actually higher levels of cardiovascular disease. So, I'm not trying to demonize this man by any means, but I do think, important question to ask before moving forward and publishing data that fits your stance would be, what's going on with these countries that are consuming more fat, but, might not have the higher rates of cardiovascular disease. So what do we do with this data? Results from this study obviously gained a lot of media attention. And so in the late 1970s, a U.S. Senate committee led by George McGovern, which I think with a last name like McGovern, very appropriate for working in government, right? He led this group that essentially published these dietary goals for the United States in order to fight this heart disease. And so the goals were, first and foremost, obviously, to eat less fat and cholesterol. The last two, which I'm sure a lot of us wouldn't completely disagree with, we'd probably agree with some of these statements, that we should eat less refined carbohydrates and sugars, and get more complex carbohydrates from vegetables, fruits, and grains. So that, those last two aren't, or they are difficult to argue with, because I think we can take some beneficial information from that. But the main point of these recommendations was fat makes us fat, it gives us heart disease, and we need to avoid it. So I'm going to show you a trend of graphs here of the United States. And this starts in 1985, and these graphs are from the CDC, and they were obtained from just surveillance. This is just a phone call to households across the United States asking for height and weight, and then by that we can calculate BMI, or body mass index. So for obesity, a body mass index of 30 or greater, that's considered to be obese. And so it does give a little example of about 30 pounds overweight for a person that's about 5'4". But so watch this trend here as we start to implement these new dietary guidelines from the late 1970s. So let's see if we can get this to flip right. So we're going along here. We're to 1989 now. We're seeing more dark blue, which is going to be higher rates. In 91, we get a new category. 92, 93, more dark blue. 95, more dark blue. 96, 97, another new category. 98, 99, 2000, 2001, another new category. So the new categories are starting to pop up a little more frequently. 2002, 2003, 4. So clearly, I think what we can see from these trends, and this is low fat, we're avoiding fat. I think something's not quite right here. I don't know about you guys, but I don't think that's...
been doing pretty well.
Yeah. I think we need to take some notes, maybe see what's going on in that state. So it stops with 2010. So the CDC does have more information from 2011 up to the present, but they've actually included some new exclusion criteria. So it wouldn't be quite fair if we compared 2011 up to the present moment, because the criteria is not quite the same. Another thing to think of, I'm going to hypothesize that these levels are actually probably quite higher than what's being reported, because again, this is not data that's being gained from like doctors' records. This is just what people are reporting on the phone, and we've been able to determine through other research that people tend to underestimate their weight. So, this is scary. To me, this is scary. And I think another scary part is that I think the graph started in 87, and we're at 2010 here, and clearly the trend was only worsening, not improving. So every year, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, they come out with recommendations. And actually, that might not be completely true. I think the recommendations are updated every 5 years. Even though we've had lots of good data from the past, we're finally coming to a place where these committees are coming and saying, okay, we're looking back at the data, we're paying attention to the trends, and maybe we didn't have it quite right from the beginning. Maybe we need to make some changes. So one of the big changes that was noted in the recent guidelines that just came out, the Academy, so these are two different organizations that essentially are supporting and kind of checking each other. The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics supports the decision by the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, so 2015 this year, not to carry forward previous recommendations that cholesterol intake be limited to no more than 300 milligrams a day. So we're finding that cholesterol we're getting in our diet is not necessarily making us have high levels of cholesterol. So another thing, not only with dietary cholesterol, but dietary saturated fats. So again, going back to this low fat concept, it's been encouraged that we avoid saturated fats for that they increase our risk for heart disease and cardiovascular disease. So the Academy is also suggesting that not only the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, but also the Health and Human Services and the U.S. Department of Agriculture support a similar revision that is actually de-emphasizing saturated fat as a nutrient of concern. So the scientific report discusses the prominent meta-analyses. So essentially that means some people have gone back through all of the data that's been collected over the years, and they've analyzed the data and pulled together facts that have consistently found no relationship between saturated fat intake and risk for cardiovascular disease. And I think this next part is interesting. So bear with me here because I'm going to read some of these exact words. So again, studies are consistently showing no relationship between saturated fat intake and risk for cardiovascular disease, but the interpretation of these findings is obfuscated in the report by the inclusion of assumptions about unspecified replacement nutrients. So any guesses of what may be these unspecified replacement nutrients? So, because if we think about if you're avoiding one area, so if you're avoiding a certain group of macronutrient like fat, you're likely eating more of another macronutrient. So, and I'm going to geek out on you guys a little bit here because, again, I think, this to try, not necessarily to try to understand the science in depth, but to see some of this come out and how they work through this, I think it's important to understand. So I want to show you how I'm getting this information. I don't want this to just be do this because I told you so type of thing. So essentially, by gathering this data, we're able to put these macronutrients into an equation so that we can make these educated recommendations. So there is no need for these assumptions to fully describe the relationship between macronutrient groups and cardiovascular disease risk using the evidence present in this review. If one grants that each macronutrient group exhibits some real effect on the risk for cardiovascular disease, and acknowledge the limitation that these effects can only be observed in the context of substitution between the nutrients, then the findings among the studies reviewed can be expressed in these equations here. So in equation 1, a reduction in saturated fat and an increase in polyunsaturated fat results in a reduction in the risk of cardiovascular disease. So that's one thing. We're kind of comparing different fats now. And in equation 2, a reduction of saturated fat with an increase in carbohydrate intake results in an increased risk for cardiovascular disease. So then if we are taking this information, we come up with equation 3, and that demonstrates that carbohydrate intake conveys a greater amount of cardiovascular disease risk than does saturated fat. So combined again with evidence from multiple studies that we've actually had for quite some time now, let's see, so essentially the estimated risk of saturated fat with cardiovascular disease is near zero, and it's much more likely that the intake of, or the impact of carbohydrate on cardiovascular disease is definitely positive. So again, coming down here, because I know once we get kind of more into this kind of geek out moment for some of us who are really into this, but it's easy to get lost with a lot of these big words. The take-home point is that the evidence that's been summarized, again, by the Dietary Guidelines Academy suggests that the most effective recommendation for the reduction in cardiovascular disease would be a reduction in carbohydrate intake with replacement by polyunsaturated fat. So, and we'll kind of get into the different types of fat and that type of thing. But the strong take-home point is because for so many years it's been, you got to avoid the fat, and more specifically saturated fat. There's a lot of studies where they're comparing the different types of diet. So like Atkins, Zone, Ornish, Learn. And the other thing too is that I don't really like to call diets or tell people you need to follow a diet. I think it's important to eat real food. And I think it's important to get a variety of good real food, because when you're following a diet, it feels like something you have to do. And I think being educated about foods that are good for you is something that you choose to do. So if anyone's interested in those list of studies, if you want some good reading material, you're having trouble falling asleep at night, I'll email you that list. Okay, so let's get back to the basics. Let's give you guys some information that you can actually apply, that you can apply in your own lives. So this is something that we teach our participants in our New You lifestyle program that we started here this year. Because it's quite amazing how little we all know about the food we eat. And food is hugely important. It's a huge part of our health. It's what fuels and nourishes all the cells in your body. So, you know, we pay attention to the type of gas we put in our car, the type of oil. You know, it's time to start making this a priority, because the body that you have is one of the best machines that you'll ever have in your life. So let's start with fats, because that's what we're here to talk about. So just breaking down the basics, why fats are important. So maybe some of you heard of essential fatty acids. They're called essential because your body cannot make these. We have to get them from our diet. Fats are important because they help you absorb different nutrients from your food. Vitamin D, which I'm sure you guys are all really familiar with, very popular vitamin in the media. So having you know, good healthy fats in your diet, eating or taking vitamin D with a meal can help you absorb more of it. Excuse me. So fats also help optimize cellular function. So all the cells in your body, their membrane is composed of a fatty layer. It's composed of fats. Not only cells, but your brain. I tell you what, that's one organ I do not want to fail on me, as I'm sure many of you would agree with that. And your fat, over 70% of your brain is made of fat. So if you're avoiding fat, and we know that fats are essential, we need to get them in their diet, how can you support some of these, your cells, your brain? That's huge. And another thing that catches a lot of people's attention, especially as we all age, are hormones. So hormones, a key component there with why fat is important in our diet. So this is really, really interesting. This is probably one of my favorite graphs, and I love talking to people about this and teaching them because food not only provides different nutrients, micronutrients like vitamins, minerals, but it also affects our metabolism in a huge way. So I think this graph here is very telling of why we want to be eating more fat, especially when it comes to weight. Our lifestyle program, it's not a weight loss program, but that's probably one of the top goals that people come participate in the program, is they want to lose weight. And so by eating fat, you can see here, you're essentially keeping your blood sugar very steady. We're not experiencing big spikes in blood sugar, because when you have a big spike in blood sugar, you're going to have an insulin spike. So insulin is our fat storage hormone. So I don't think a lot of us really want to store a bunch of fat. So understanding this relationship and how this works, I think, and especially looking at this graph, really drives home that point. Another great thing about fat, it tastes amazing. So that's a positive thing. And it helps keep you full. It's been really interesting, I tell you, when we have people change their macronutrients like this, because obviously the majority of us consume quite a few more carbohydrates than is actually necessary. People are like, I'm just not eating as much as I normally used to. We've actually had to go back and encourage people to eat more to help with weight loss, because your body gets to a point where you're not eating enough and you kind of go into survival or starvation mode. So that's a really interesting thing with fat too. So we're going to come back to that graph because that graph is really cool. So how to choose healthy fat. So this is good stuff, and I included this in the handout, and if you didn't get one, definitely let one of us know before you leave, because I think this is stuff you can take home and you can put it on your fridge or your pantry. Start adding this stuff to your grocery list. So things like avocado, coconut butter, grass-fed butter. And the reason why you'll see grass-fed on this list is because we know that animals that consume grass and plants are higher, more dense in omega-3 fatty acids, so good anti-inflammatory types of fat. So by choosing those types of things, you're going to be helping to keep inflammation down. Nuts and seeds, so walnuts, pecans, pumpkin seeds, chia seeds, which we have some chia seed pudding over here that's fantastic. Good fats, good omega-3s. Fish. How many people like fish here? Awesome. So how many people like sardines? Nice. I'm impressed. I ask people about sardines, and I've kind of got to a point where I almost cringe a little bit before I ask, because I always get this reaction like, ugh, sardines. But sardines are actually really good for you. Super high in omega-3s. Get them, you can buy them packed in olive oil, and really good with a little sea salt. An excellent protein, good healthy fat option. And you know, being in Wichita, we're not really close to any ocean. So it can be difficult to get good sources of fish, but I tell you what, some of the grocery stores we have popping up, you can get some really good options. Even Target, I've seen wild caught, I've even seen grass-fed beef at Target. I've heard Walmart, I've heard Aldi's. So this stuff is becoming more widely available. Free-range fowl, again, you know, these animals are being raised in the environment that they evolved into. And so, you know, I always tell people cows are not made to eat grain, corn. The reason why we do that is because, you know, I'm not going to lie, I'll be honest, a good corn grain-fed cow does taste good. But I tell you what, since I've been buying more grass-fed, they taste really good too. So, and I know I'm giving myself a really nutritionally dense option when I do that. I'm feeding my body well. So in oils, don't fear oils. One thing I would encourage you on the oils when you start to cook with them, you want to watch for smoking points. So you can actually oxidize some of the oils. So we actually give our new you participants, we have a great list where it essentially lists out the good types of oils and their smoking points. One thing you can always do is if you put it in your pan or oven and you see it smoking, dump it out. Just start over, because you're essentially kind of negating this healthy option with what you're trying to go for. You're oxidizing those oils. So any questions so far? I know I'm throwing a lot at you guys, but.
What's the best olive oil? There's so many options.
Can I name names?
Yes.
Okay, I can throw out. We don't have any sponsors here.
No. There's no medical credit for this. Sorry, it won't apply.
It's funny when we go to seminars and trainings, you know, everyone always wants to know, like, what are you using, what company, and can't do that. So, okay, so I really like California Olive Ranch. You can get this at Walmart, you can get it at Dillon's, all the new like Whole Foods and Green Acres and all that good stuff. I like it, one, because it's made in the United States. And another thing I would encourage you to read about is the adulteration of olive oils, especially in Italy. This is not a regulated industry, and remind me the type of the oil they're coming in with.
Malaysian soybean oil.
Soybean oil.
It's being smuggled in.
Yeah, they make it the same color. And again, you're just, you know, you're trying to make a good, healthy choice for yourself, and you end up consuming something that's kind of the opposite of what you're going for. So I think it is. I think that's another important thing, not to get too far off topic, but, you know, educate yourself, spend some time. You vote every time you go to the grocery store with what you're purchasing. So this is some good stuff. Any other questions? Good question.
Why do you like that olive oil?
Oh, sorry. I kind of got off topic on that. So I do like it because it's made in the United States. And I like it because you can trace back to which grove, which section of their grove where the olives are grown. It's all processed. It stays here in the U.S. They've got a great website. I actually had a patient tell me that went to their website and told me that the smoking point of their olive oil is actually a lot higher than some of the other olive oils based on its quality. And I did go and check that out. And so that's kind of a nice oil that you can turn to, that it's unlikely that, you know, you're gonna oxidize or push that. So carbohydrates, let's cover carbohydrates. So there are no essential carbohydrates. We have essential fatty acids, and when I get to proteins, we have essential proteins or amino acids. But carbohydrates are not essential, and here's why. So your liver has the ability to make glucose. It's called gluconeogenesis. And there will not be a spelling test either, so this is good. So your liver can take the essential amino acids and essential fatty acids, and make glucose during time. So a good example of this is at nighttime. The majority of us go to bed, we've had dinner a few hours later, we're not getting up until, 6, 7, 8, whatever it is the next morning. So we potentially go through about a period of anywhere from 8 to 12 hours where we're not consuming any nutrients. So your cells don't go to bed. They don't take a vacation either. I tell people that, well, I was on vacation. Well, cells don't go on vacation with you. They still respond to a lot of these, to everything. So gluconeogenesis comes in to where your blood sugar might go down a little bit because we haven't had any food, and you're essentially in a fasted state, and so those cells keep working and metabolizing things, and they need energy. So your liver performs gluconeogenesis to give you that energy that you need, to give you that glucose that you need. So we don't have to get this from our diet. Your body changes 100% of the carbohydrates that you eat into sugar. So, and a lot of you have probably heard a little bit about simple versus complex carbohydrates, and not to get too in depth into that, but essentially I want you to view this as, I want you to think of these sugars in a chain. And so simple chains are shorter and our body can quickly metabolize and break those down. Complex carbohydrates, the chain's a little longer, so it takes longer to digest and be broken down. And so most simple carbohydrates you're going to be getting in a lot of our processed sugar products, so sodas and jams and jellies and things like that. Candy, cookies, stuff that's not nutritionally dense for you. And complex carbohydrates are going to come more from some of your fibrous fruits and vegetables and things like that. So we'll get into how to choose some nutrient-dense carbohydrates here. I have to admit, Dr. Jeff picked the pictures here for this, and those do look quite tasty. Yeah, those look fun. So unfortunately, this is something we want to avoid. This is, while they're very pretty, and I'm sure they taste really good at the time.
I think I read your first sentence, and I was like, oh, that's an example.
Yeah, no, this is good. This is obviously stuff we want to avoid. This, if someone knows, please educate me, but I cannot think of one thing off the top of my head, one nutritionally dense, beneficial thing that would come from some of these things. So another thing we encourage our folks, any of our patients that we see here really, but we really emphasize and go into much more depth, much more teaching in the lifestyle program, is that to choose carbohydrates that are higher in fiber. Because that fiber, again, is going to slow down digestion a bit. It's going to help with that, blood sugar spike that I kind of talked about earlier. So we kind of get into a little bit of carb counting initially with our patients because we want people to be aware of this stuff. We want you to learn how your body tolerates and responds to some of these things. So one equation we teach our patients is to calculate net carbs. And that's when you look at your nutrition label. And, somebody brought this up to me one day and I thought, oh, this is a good point. I didn't explain myself very well. Well, you're wanting me to buy foods that don't come with labels. So there's a great website I refer people to, and I can post it on our Facebook page later. And you can type in any type of fruit, vegetable, any type of real food, and it will give you good, reliable nutrition data on that food. So we encourage people to calculate net carbs to get an idea. So this teaspoon calculator is a new concept because I think it's important to give you different options in how to view things. The teaspoon calculator is interesting because you can essentially estimate how many teaspoons of table sugar you're consuming with different meals. So, giving people a different viewpoint on that can be more helpful sometimes, than others. So by doing that, you would take net carbs divided by 5, and that would give you an estimation of that. So just a different way to kind of look at that. So here's my favorite graph again, and this is why it's important to be aware of how many carbohydrates you're consuming.
Kristen, for those
Yeah.
in the back, can you go over what each line?
Yes.
I think it's easy to see.
Yes, I can, and I can. So essentially you're seeing this big dotted, I think that's green spike, and those are carbohydrates. So that's what carbohydrates are doing. We get this big initial spike, and remember I mentioned earlier when we get the big blood sugar spike, insulin spike, insulin equals fat storage. The protein is, you do get a little bit of a blood sugar spike with the protein, but definitely, it's a little more even, kind of follows the same curve as the fat. And the fat, you're getting essentially no spike, really. It's just a nice, even, steady line here. So how to choose optimal carb.
Hours after.
Oh, I'm sorry, hours after eating. Yeah. So in those first 2 hours after eating, that's where you can see the biggest spike there with foods that are higher in carbohydrates. So I'm going to pass around a few handouts here. And these are handouts, you can just look at them together. They're handouts that we give our patients in our New You program. We've really broken down, one of them is a fiber handout. So giving you an idea of different types of carbohydrates and how much fiber are in those carbohydrates. And then a low carbohydrate diet handout, which really just gives you a good list of real food to eat and how to find good balance in that.
That big insulin spike, I also call that the Chinese food effect.
Yes.
Now you eat. Like, oh,
Yeah,
this stuff,
yeah.
And like an hour later, you're like,
I'm ready to eat again.
ready to go back?
Yeah. So, I mean, you can tell that by choosing good healthy fats and incorporating some good protein too, it's going to keep you fuller longer, and you're not going to have those cravings and those kind of blood sugar and energy dips too. So I did put quinoa, buckwheat, and some legumes here because for people that have their insulin's working well, there's no resistance there, by balancing in some of these, I call them or gluten-free grains, if you will. So tend to be more anti-inflammatory and a really good amount of fiber. So for people that, again, their insulin's working well, there's no insulin resistant picture. If weight loss is one of your top goals, I would actually avoid these until you can help reach your goal, because they do contain carbohydrates. But again, they're going to be more nutritionally dense than the pretty donuts on the last slide, and your cereals, breads, pastas. They just really aren't nutritionally dense. I truly don't believe any type of food is inherently bad. I just think, why not choose foods that are going to benefit you more from a nutritional standpoint?
So what about the whole wheat bread though? Because we all hear the whole wheat.
Yeah.
Grain.
Yeah. Are you guys familiar with the glycemic index and just glycemic load and how, so foods that they essentially measure these foods and compare them with a blood sugar response to just plain table sugar, right? Some of the whole wheat products are actually higher glycemic than just the regular refined. Right. Yeah, exactly. So while I appreciate trying to, go for a healthier option, it's really not, because you can't, that's why I love this graph. You can't ignore what these foods are doing metabolically. So, good point. Okay, proteins. So proteins are important because they're essential amino acids, just like our essential fatty acids. So they help us build and repair tissue. The amino acids are building blocks of bone, cartilage, muscle, skin, and blood. And these also help contribute to the formation of all the different hormones in our body. So essential. Fats and proteins are essential. And these are some options of how you can pick nutrient-dense protein. And some of these overlap with some of our healthy fat options too. Again, I like to go for the grass-fed wild-caught because it's a more nutritionally dense option. I also included quinoa, buckwheat, hemp seed, chia, organic soy, mung beans. Who has heard of a mung bean? Okay, so I just learned about mung beans last week, and my amazing but poor husband, who has suffered through kitchen experimentations of mine, trying to find a good, more nutritionally dense option for pasta, I think we finally found a winner, right? Would you say? Okay, this is good. This is good. Yeah, the consistency. If I was doing a blind taste test, this is pasta. It tastes like pasta. And way more nutritionally dense. Mung bean pasta actually has, in one serving, 24 grams of protein. That's amazing. I mean, that's like a serving of chicken breasts, or a serving of a fish. So this you can find this at Green Acres, and you can buy it on Amazon too. I've found, but it's nice. It's organic, and I will say that I think the company has actually started making the mung bean pasta with organic soy, and I know there is a lot of controversy. I'm sure you have a lot of questions about soy, but I will say from an environmental medicine standpoint that choosing, if you're going to consume soy, it's better to go organic just because they're one of the most heavily sprayed crops. And again, why not choose something that's more nutritionally dense for you? You're being kind to your body by choosing some of these kinder foods. So I put those on there because I know we have some vegetarians in our lifestyle group, and I know maybe we have some here in the audience. So protein's important, and there are some really great vegetarian options of protein out there. So, okay, where I'm kind of coming up to the end, I'm going to cover some common misconceptions. Hopefully this will help answer any more questions you guys might have, but still feel free to interrupt. So one common misconception, low-carb diets lead to deficiencies in vital nutrients. I've heard nutritionists say this multiple times by cutting out an entire category of food, which I should emphasize that we actually don't recommend going completely, we don't recommend zero carbs. We just recommend choosing beneficial ones. That you can be missing out on a group of vitamins and minerals, and this is false. We know that by consuming some of these healthy fatty foods and proteins, you're actually getting very dense micronutrient concentration in some of these foods. Another thing with grains I think is important to understand is that they contain a substance called phytic acid, and this can actually bind to some of those necessary micronutrients, and then we excrete them and we don't really get to use them. We don't get a benefit from them. So by consuming some of these foods in their more natural, unprocessed form, you're actually getting a really good dose of different micronutrients and vitamins. So bottom line on this one, low-carb diets still offer plenty of options to get good micronutrients from both animal and plant food. So, and you know, I'm when I think about this I say low carb diet, I don't really want to call it a type of diet because that's, you know, again, I don't want this to appear like this is another just fad diet. I should say lifestyle, yeah.
You don't
yeah.
want to call it a ketogenic, low carb, high fat. That's right, I like that name.
Yeah.
Shorten that.
Yeah. Okay, so this is another one. Actually, we had one of our patients bring this up, and they said, I trust you guys. I feel like you guys are really great people, and
We love it when they start with that.
yeah. But you know, I talked to my doctor friend, and she was really concerned that you guys were talking about this ketosis and ketogenic diet, and she said it could kill me, and she goes, I really don't think you guys are trying to kill me, but I really want to make sure. So, and this was a good question because we do talk about ketosis, and ketosis is essentially getting your body to a phase where you're burning ketones or fatty acids for energy, which we know our cells can actually do quite efficiently. And we want them to do that, right? Kind of going back to that whole insulin and fat storage thing. We want to be able to use our fatty acid stores for energy. So ketosis, again, is what happens when we get to that phase. Now, ketoacidosis, on the other hand, sounds similar, but it's actually quite different. And I'm sure this is what her doctor friend was concerned about, and rightfully so. This ketoacidosis is a life-threatening situation. But this tends to happen, this is dependent on that hormone insulin I was talking about. So there are some people, like type 1 diabetics, for example, who don't produce any insulin. So insulin helps this process of using these fatty acids for energy. So if we don't have that, then yeah, these ketones, they're dumped into the bloodstream, and they can cause damage to quite a few of our organs. So that obviously is a life-threatening situation. For the majority of us sitting in this room, unless anyone's a type 1 diabetic, I'd say this ketoacidosis is very unlikely. I don't even know if it would be possible to reach with a low-carb diet, a lifestyle diet. But a good question. What's that?
What about a type 2?
That's a good question. You know, so here's another thing we're going to post on our Facebook page if we have it. There's a fantastic TED Talk that's available by a medical doctor in, can't remember, Tennessee maybe. So she runs a clinic and she helps people reverse their type 2 diabetes with our lifestyle diet.
Well, she didn't
It's a,
call us.
yeah, it's a low carb, high fat, diet. So because even though we see this insulin resistant picture with people who have type 2 diabetes, for example, by making these changes, by making some of these lifestyle changes, we can actually encourage your body to have that work well again, to function well again. So it's a really cool TED Talk. We're going to post it again because I think we maybe posted it a few weeks ago. And it's really inspiring talk. So I'm actually going to talk a little bit about, am I losing my, there we go. Okay, so I'm gonna carry over that question a little bit into this one. So we talked about this initially at the beginning. Low carb diets raise your risk of heart disease. So again, we've got plenty of data here to support that that's not the case. This is really exciting because how many of you count calories? Oh, good. I like this group. Man, this is good. So we have studies that show that people who follow a more low carbohydrate, high fat diet lose more weight than people who follow a low fat, high carb diet. And that's like no calorie counting. That's eating to fullness. So that's pretty cool. Helps reduce blood pressure, lowers blood sugar, and improves symptoms of diabetes. Lowers triglycerides. It helps change LDL, gets tagged as the bad type of cholesterol. And we know that there's different types of LDL. So we have small, dense, and large, fluffy. Large, fluffy is better. I always think of it as like a beach ball and a BB from a BB gun. Which one do you want hitting your window? Probably a beach ball. Large, fluffy LDL. So they can actually reverse some of these small, dense LDL particles into the big, safer, fluffy ones. And actually can help increase HDL, so our good cholesterol. So that's good too. So with all of this data, this actually shows that this type of a diet actually helps improve those biomarkers of cardiovascular health. So let's talk a little bit more about diabetes. The American Diabetes Association, which I can appreciate their mission to prevent and cure diabetes and to improve the lives of all people affected by diabetes. They're the group that I really, really hope takes to heart some of these new guidelines because they recommend carbohydrate counting, which we do too, initially, again, because we want people to learn and understand, get to a point where you don't have to count anymore. You already know the choices to make. So this carbohydrate counting, planning for meals, how many carbs should you have in a meal? So a place to start, this is directly off their website, a place to start is about 45 to 60 grams of carbohydrate at each meal. Now, who can tell me, is that a good idea or not, based on the graph I've showed you a few times? Not good. Does this make any sense? No sense at all. So I wanted to show you guys a little bit of data from our program. This is a 56-year-old female, and her goals are weight loss and to improve her energy. She has beautiful grandchildren, and she wants to age gracefully and be able to keep up with her grandkids. And so you can see here, I won't go over every single number, and it's probably a little difficult to see because of the size, but this person implemented some of our dietary. Actually, she really committed and implemented all of our dietary recommendations. I'd say 60 to 70% of her overall daily intake was coming from healthy fat. So in conventional medicine, we'd look at her cholesterol panel, which her total cholesterol is over 200, and her LDL is over 99, which these are our reference ranges. And most docs look at the reference range and say, if you're in, it's fine. If you're out, then we need to do something. We like to take things a little bit further based on data we have and go for more of optimal ranges in some of these. But this person had a 51-point drop in total cholesterol in 12 weeks. She also essentially cut her triglycerides in half because it's not eating fat that makes your triglycerides high, it's carbohydrates, it's sugar. Because your body doesn't know what to do with all that sugar and it just stores it as fat, turns it into triglycerides and stores it as fat. So this person also had about a 60-point drop in their LDL cholesterol. Now, we actually just started working with a new company that breaks down these cholesterol panels a lot more than this basic one we initially ran. We actually weren't working with this company at the time, and we're actually going to implement this with our next group that we start. So we'll have even more good data than this. We'll be able to look to see how many of those LDL particles are small and dense and how many are large and fluffy. So that's really cool. So while we can't say that here, we still saw some improvements. The other thing we do is we measure your body mass using a full body DEXA scanner that we have here, and that's going to tell us exactly how much of your tissue is muscle and how much is fat. And so by eating more fat, she lost almost 13.5 pounds of fat. And she actually gained lean muscle too. So
In 3 months.
yeah, in 3 months. In 3 months. And this is lifestyle stuff. This is no 3-month intensive. We tell people the end of the 12 weeks is the beginning. So, that's been really fun for us to see. And here's another one, a 43-year-old male, very similar changes. Not as significant in his cholesterol panel, but still positive nonetheless. But his body mass index changes were really impressive. And this guy he wasn't really exercising regularly. I tell people this too, you cannot exercise away a bad diet. It's just not, I'll pull a study to show that it's not the way it works. I also tell people, a lot of us think it's got to restrict calories and exercise more. You're not a calculator either. It's way more complicated, way more complex than that too. So just to start wrapping things up a little bit more, a lot of weight that's initially lost when you switch to this type of a diet is water weight. And that actually is true. Initially, you will lose quite a bit of water weight. Some of it might be based on those insulin levels because we know that this can cause kidneys to release some sodium, and with that, water does follow. But then what I've showed you in some of our body composition changes, what follows then is the fat. The fat really goes away. So I put a study up here that shows how we can track this with the DEXA machine, and that's available to anyone. You can, if you're interested in that, you can come in and have that done. You don't have to do the lifestyle program. Most people would probably find a lot more benefit by going through the lifestyle program, but we can still give some good information based on that, and we can do that in an appointment for sure. So in this one, just to round this out again, we've kind of hammered this one in. I think that saturated fats are not as dangerous as they've been demonized for so many years. There's plenty of data out there. There's plenty of data too that these good fats, again, help give you a more optimal cardiovascular profile. And again, we still get people that come in that say, well, okay, what do you have for breakfast? Well, I have 3 eggs, but I only have 1 yolk. I throw out the other yolks. Don't have to do that. You're missing out on a lot of good B vitamins, good fats. Keep the yolks. We can keep those in our diet, so that's good. So I wanted to finish by showing you, this is again more information we like to give our New You, we call it the New You lifestyle program. So these are some of our favorite ways to add in some extra healthy good fats. These are some products that we like. So Gather bars are available at natural grocers. They're nuts and seeds. Lots of good healthy coconut oil fat, some nut butter fats in those, and those are delicious. They have a decent amount of protein, but really with the nuts and seeds and some of those good coconut oil, nut butter that's in there, you're gonna get some good healthy fat from that. So we've had a lot of people say, okay, now I know I need to eat fat, how do I get it in? Because for so long we've avoided it. Kerrygold is probably the most delicious butter that we've been able to find, and it comes from grass-fed cows, which is nice. Lots of good extra omega-3s in there. These little packets at the bottom, you can't see them very well. The brand is Artisanal. I might be mispronouncing that, but they make a coconut butter that's amazing. And I just eat these straight out of the package. So you don't have to put it on anything. You certainly could. But again, a quick, easy way, because a lot of people are like, okay, well, I'm eating more nuts, but I'm kind of getting burned out on the nuts and seeds. So a packet of this is a great way to add in some extra fats. What's that?
Where do you get those?
Oh, actually, I found those anywhere, from Dillon's to Target to the health food stores. I threw that artisanal up there again. That coconut butter is fantastic. So this coconut milk down here at the bottom, this is not in the big carton that you'll find with like almond milks and things like that. You'll find this over in the cooking section, and it's actually a culinary coconut milk, so it's very dense. It's like frosting, and it's amazing. Way better than frosting, obviously. A lot of fiber in this, a lot of healthy fat. I add about a 1/3 cup of this to my morning smoothie, fill the rest with water, good quality protein powder, good nut butter, some cinnamon, and this is amazing. And it keeps me full. I have breakfast around 7 o'clock every morning, and I'm full till lunch. So I want to open it up to questions, but I also want to point out this cottage cheese. For those of you that tolerate dairy, this is amazing. You need to go buy this and try this out. It's full fat. Again, this is grass-fed cows, organic, so good omega-3s. Cottage cheese is a decent source of protein too, but this is fantastic. We can't keep this stuff around very long. So that kind of wraps up my presentation for you guys. And do you guys have any more? You guys have had some really good questions along the way.
Can you
yeah.
detail for those, I know we have a lot of people in here that have done the New You.
Oh, yes.
Can you talk
Yeah.
in detail about how that program works?
Right.
And what the different phases are and what it includes?
Right. Yeah. So the New Year program that we developed and started at the beginning of the year is a 12-week program. It starts with blood work and an initial full-body DEXA scan where we are able to determine your lean muscle mass, your total body fat. And then, that way we can really go in and make pretty specific macronutrient recommendations for you based on you. I mean, this is individualized medicine for sure. Starts out with, you get weekly appointments where you come to the office. We're checking vitals, we're monitoring blood pressure, and then you can meet with a provider, which we encourage and most people do, especially at the beginning, because that's when we spend a lot of time teaching. And then as people get into the program, their weekly visits, if they're moving along fine, they don't have questions, it's just a check-in for vitals, again, blood pressure, making sure things are okay. And then you also get a weekly B12 shot. And we do provide methylated B12 shots. It's the most active bioavailable form of B12. Doesn't have to be additionally metabolized for your body to use it. And that's, I can go into more detail about that, but that's probably like a whole nother lecture with that one. So that's another perk. And we do that because B vitamins are very supportive for overall metabolism, very supportive of the liver. So that's, and it also does give people a nice energy boost. Because when you start to make these big changes, it's a big metabolic shift for your body. And so initially some fatigue, a little bit of lack in energy, can be expected. Not everyone. We get some people that come in after those first 2 weeks and they're like, oh my gosh, I feel amazing. And really the biggest thing is these dietary changes. I mean, of course, we get into exercise and optimal times and optimal types of exercise. But it's, again, like I mentioned, you can't exercise away a bad diet. So we see the biggest changes when people make these dietary changes that we spend a lot of time going into. Another thing that you get in the program, we do webinars every other week, which have been really fun, and we bring in guest speakers for those. So you have access to that. And then you get a weekly email. And in the email, it's stuff that we're covering during the week. It's just so you can have a hard copy of what's going on. Because coming into those appointments, we're throwing a lot at you. You're learning a lot. So those emails are a nice recap. Another thing, because social media is so big these days, you are included in a private Facebook group. And I tell you what, that has probably been one of the cooler things about this program is that we've created these communities where people come together, post questions, give advice, give tips on things that have worked for them. So we've gotten a lot of good feedback from the social media aspect that we're using. And it's totally private. So no one knows that you're in the group other than the other group members. And it's a very respectful, safe place, and we monitor it, and we post a lot of good information on that as well. So once we kind of wrap up, we also provide fitness trackers. So to be honest, the first company we started working with, the fitness trackers have been a disappointment, to say the least, unfortunately. But we are working on getting with a new company for that. So that's neat because we're able to track sleep and activity. Because again, sleep is a huge part of your overall health. And since it is a lifestyle program, that's something nice that we can track. We've actually been able to identify sleep apnea in a few folks based on some of that. Not necessarily diagnose it, but at least recognize, hey, we got a problem here. Let's do some follow-up testing. That's huge. So once we kind of wrap up towards the end of the 12 weeks, at the end, we repeat all the biomarkers that we're checking because everyone's really into the data and we want to see the numbers change. We have to remind people again, like, all these other amazing things that are happening, like chronic headaches are not coming back. They're going away. Energy's better, sleeping better, my mood is better. And then we've had, brain fog. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's not a good pharmaceutical for brain fog.
Not a legal one anyway.
Well, this is true. This is true. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So, and we are giving away a lifestyle program tonight. So, did everyone get to sign? Let's make sure that gets around.
Didn't come by either. The 2 papers
Oh,
you sent, they didn't
okay.
come
Who put the 2 papers in their pocket? That's good information. Oh, okay. Somebody's calling themselves out in the back. So, like I said, you get access to all that stuff. We truly believe in just educating our patients and how to make good choices to support their overall health has made some really cool, big differences in people's lives. So